Hello, everybody. This is the policy experiment session. We will have 3 presentations in these sessions, one by Juana, one by Ana, and one by Sasha. And without further ado, we will start with the first presentation. Juana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you to the organizing committee for this amazing conference. So my name is Juana Castro. I will present you today the research I've been working on with Stefan Drews and Jeroen Vandenberg, that are my supervisors, on how advertising and social norms can affect low carbon choice. So first of all, our motivation. Why are we studying these effects of norms and advertising in low carbon choice? And first of all, emissions of supply chains for consumption goods are huge. They generate more CO2 than personal transport and home energy use combined. And at the moment, there are not really regulations to these CO2 emissions of supply chains. So in absence of these regulation policies to supply chains, many governments have relied on information provision policies such as labels, campaigns, or norm communication to influence behavior by activating citizens for environmental inclinations. Among these policies that use information provision, social norms have been praised as a very effective tool to promote environmental behaviors, especially in home energy and recycling. So the typical example would be that there's many experiments where they send the electricity bill comparing the household consumption with that of the neighbors, and that would make people reduce their consumption. Like, you don't want to be a neighbor that consumes the most energy in your building. But what happens with consumption choices? Could norms communication shift behavior towards low carbon consumption? So here we would have to take into account advertising. Why? Because the consumption sector, the consumption of goods is full of advertising. We mostly get information from consumption goods by this way. And the advertising mechanisms have been for years communicated. We know advertising works very good and is very effective by a repetition mechanism. I show you many times a product, and suddenly you develop a preference for that product you have been exposed to. So these mechanisms are very effective and are part of the consumption context. So our aim was to combine these two information-based instruments to see, in a context of advertising, how would low carbon social norms work. So in a society where consumers are exposed to low and high carbon advertising, and consumers having low carbon social norms that are very strong. So for example, many people among them consume low carbon, or very weak, nobody among you consumes low carbon products. How these two influences affect your product perception, and finally your purchase intention between a low and a high carbon product. So to answer this question, we did an experiment where we focused in three main questions. So the first one is if social norms and advertising are effective in shifting consumption towards low carbon. Then, if in presence of advertisement, social norms could be effective in shifting behavior towards low carbon. And finally, if norms and advertisement use similar or different mechanisms to affect behaviors. Those are the three questions I hopefully will answer with this presentation. So this was the experimental design. We used, as I already mentioned, social norms, strong and weak social norms, and advertising that I will refer to green as advertising for a low carbon product, and brown advertising for a high carbon product. And every possible combination of these two information instruments, and that we will compare with a control treatment where there would be no advertisement and no social norm. So we will see how these instruments work. For this, we recruited 2,700 US participants, so around 300 in each condition in the experiment. And we recruited them via MTour, that is a platform where you can recruit participants to do different tasks. This experiment was presented as an observation task, and the instruction was very simple. You would be presented with an image, and you would then have to answer some questions. That was the task participants were doing. And the image we presented was a fictitious Facebook homepage with both advertising and social norm posts that we created for the purpose of the experiment. So experimental sequence would look like this. First, you would be shown an image of a Facebook homepage with 5 different posts. And the posts, if you were in the control condition, it would be just irrelevant posts from a concert, trip, and so on. And if you were assigned to a treatment, then, for example, if you were assigned to a low carbon to the green advertisement treatment, you would see an advertisement of a low carbon product. So you would see this image for some seconds, and then we would ask you questions about the content of the posts. For each post, we would have a question. And finally, when they had answered the questions, they come to the decision screen, where we would ask for a purchase intention between a low and a high carbon good. The question was, if you were to buy a tablet, which of the following would you choose? Choose one and participate in a lottery for a $200 bonus for the chosen item. So the two items were a Samsung Galaxy Pro tablet and an IAM Eco tablet that has a certified eco label and produces less emissions than any tablet in the market. So why tablets? The selection criteria was that tablets are a relevant product for most participants. They are likely to be advertised in Facebook. They generate emissions not only in production but in use, and they represent a non-trivial purchase decision because they have a high market price. So what you're seeing in this slide is how we built the advertising posts. So if you were assigned to an advertisement treatment, you would see rather one of these posts, one for IAM Eco and one from Samsung, and this we took from the brand webpage. And next, I'm going to show you how we introduced the social norms. So the norm we introduced was descriptive and indirect, since they have been proved the most influential in pro-environmental behaviors. And descriptive refers to communicating how many people or what proportion of people engages to a behavior. And the indirect refers to the fact that we wanted to influence behavior, but with a correlated pro-environmental behavior. We were not going to use exactly the behavior we wanted to influence, but a correlated one. So before the experiment, we asked participants to rate the relatedness between various behaviors, pro-environmental behaviors, and we found the most correlated to buy electronic devices that consume less energy was using energy-saving light bulbs. So with this behavior, we constructed the norm. So you see the norm was introduced with a Facebook poll. That is a Facebook tool you can use to ask questions. And the poll said, do you use energy-saving light bulbs? And you had the strong social norm where most participants said yes, that they use energy-saving light bulbs. And you have the weak social norm where most people declared they didn't engage in this behavior. So this is how we introduce the norm. And I'm going to start with the results. What did we found? So you have the proportion of low carbon choice for the different treatments alone. So we have in the baseline condition, only 7% of the participants chose the low carbon tablet, so the IAMECO tablet. Whereas with the social norm, with the strong social norm, this percentage almost doubles. We have now around 40% of the people choosing the low carbon tablet when presented with the strong norm. We see that the weak norm has an effect too, but is lower than that of the strong norm. So it was important, the descriptive part that said that the majority did actually engage with the other pro-environmental behavior. And finally, we have the green advertisement that we see that the effect is huge. It more than triples the number of participants that chose the low carbon tablet. Finally, the brown advertisement that we don't see a significant effect since already everybody chose the Samsung tablet, no? So the Samsung advertisement didn't have a significant effect compared to baseline. So we answered the first question, that is, are social norms and advertising effective in shifting consumption towards low carbon? So far, we would say yes, they're both useful in shifting behavior towards low carbon. Here I have the logistic regression model for low carbon choice with the different treatments. I'm not going to go into details now. It's more for discussion if you want to come later. I will proceed with the next one that shows the results of the 9 treatments. So here again, we have low carbon choice, and we have a point for every different treatment. In the x-axis, we have whether there was social norm presentation or not. So if there was no norm, if the norm was strong, or if the presented norm was weak. So I will turn with the first line, that is green advertisement. The first point is the results for green advertisement alone, for presentation of green advertisement alone. And the shadow region in green that you're seeing is the confidence interval for this green advertisement condition. So what we see is that when green advertisement is combined with a strong or with a weak norm, the points fall into a confidence interval, and that means the effect is not different. So it's the same presenting green advertising, that green advertising combined with a norm. And this result is quite surprising because they both go in the same direction, and what would expect some interaction effects that would trigger more low carbon choice, but it's not the case. It's exactly the same showing green advertisement than green advertisement with norms. And this holds for brown advertisement. If you turn to see the red line, the first point is brown presentation of brown advertisement alone, and the second points are brown advertisement combined with norms. And what we see is, again, these 2 points fall into a confidence interval of brown advertisement, meaning is the same presenting brown advertisement with or without the norm. In this case, the positive effect we had seen from the norm alone is offset by advertisement. So answering the second questions, are norms effective under green-brown advertisement? We would say, based on these results, no, they are not. And we come to the third part of the results. Here we wanted to know about the mechanisms. Why is advertising so effective? And for this, we performed a mediation analysis using a structural equation model. And this image that you're seeing is presenting the results of only the significant paths. So you have the treatments. We performed this analysis for green advertising and social norms that were the most effective in shifting choice. The mediators, these variables we took from a survey we had after the experiment. on product perceptions, so mainly quality, the environmental impact, and the popularity that participants perceive from the I am eco low carbon product, and some climate change beliefs, climate responsibility, how responsible you feel you are in preventing climate change, climate concern, and climate agency. So the idea was to see if the effect of these treatments was mediated by any of these variables, and this could explain further low carbon choice. So what the image is showing is green advertisement effects are mediated by quality, environmental impact, and popularity. This means if I present you with green advertisement, your perceptions of all these characteristics is higher. You perceive a higher quality, you perceive it's more popular, and therefore the low carbon choice is increased by these variables. And we see that green advertising, independent of these variables, has a direct effect in low carbon choice. Strong social norm only had effects in the environmental impact perception of the product and in climate responsibility. But for example, climate responsibility didn't have an effect of low carbon choice. So the take home message from this image would be, we see advertising works through 3 channels and affects directly low carbon choice, while the strong social norm only is mediated by 1 variable and has no direct effect on low carbon choice. And this explains why we see advertising is so efficient. And we also see it doesn't come through more perceptions of climate, but only by the product perception. So I come to the conclusions. At first, we see both social norms and green advertisement can shift consumption towards low carbon. But then when we combine these 2 instruments, we saw that the effect of advertising offsets the effect of the social norm. So what advertising would do is push behavior towards what is advertised, independent of the norm. And finally, we just saw that advertising has direct and indirect effects through increasing positive perceptions of all product characteristics, while social norms effects are weaker and only indirectly mediated by environmental perception of the product. So we had both information provision instruments, downstream information provision instruments, and we see that their distinct framing of information results in substantial behavioral differences. So they have very different effects, and advertising is super effective and can work. We saw it can work either against or in favor of climate policies, depending on what is it that is advertised. So it could work in favor of climate policy if it was low carbon products, what was advertised. That is not exactly what is happening right now. And the policy implications would be to promote real low carbon advertising. I mean real because there's a lot of greenwashing. Now it's very fashionable to advertise things are green when they not really are. So consumers are very confused at the moment. To reduce high carbon advertising through regulation or taxing it. And very importantly, to limit the expectations of social norm in a context of advertising. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juana. That was really nice. And now we have 5 minutes for questions. I will start off from the questions posted in the chat. So Theo wants to ask whether your results are sensitive to the country. That is, your subject pool is mainly done in the States, where arguably consumers receive a higher number of advertisements there. So if you would to repeat your experiment in a country where less advertisements taking place, what would you expect to find?
Well, I would expect to find the same, like advertising effects have been reported for many years, I think with many samples. So I don't think in a different country people would be less, I wouldn't expect people in another country would be less sensitive to advertising. That's my guess.
Thank you very much. Next question is by Ivan. And this actually also reflects like a question of mine, a concern of mine. So you found a significantly lower effectiveness of social norms. And the question is like, maybe this is because of the way you implement it to manipulate the social norm. So in particular, Ivan says social norm normally refers to what people of my close social environment believe and do, while in your experiment, the manipulation took place about like everybody in your very wide like social network that might include people that you don't know. And right, the more general question is like, is the way that you manipulated the social norm too indirect?
Yes, that's a very good question. The answer is yes. I think it has a lot to do how I manipulated the norm. There are many ways, like there are many concepts of social norm. What Ivan is saying is like the definition of your close network social norm. But when you're doing norm manipulation, what normally you like norm communication, this is the way how you do it. And it of course like the advertising condition was explicitly advertising the low carbon product, while this was just a correlated behavior. But if you think of social norms for consumption goods in a policy, in a policy, like as an instrumentation of policy, a government could not build a social norm for every product there is in the market. So the most you could do is appeal to like consumption, like general consumption social norms. So I think it does has a like the effects are of course explained by how we build it, but we build it like that because of the policy relevance, like what a policymaker could do. That's what we thought when we built it like this.
Thank you, Thank you very much for your answer. So one policy-related question and one by Sara. By Sara is whether you would expect to find the similar results for other behaviors like traveling, advertising train travel rather than air travel. And the policy application questions are by Anna and by Dushan. Basically, they both want to know like the bottom line of your research. How would this translate into practical policy advices? Dushant refers to the International Trade Organization. What would you advise them to do?
Well, see, the advice would be regulating advertising somehow. Yes. And the other question, I know, I forgot the other question, was related to air travel, advertising travel versus, well, I would guess, see, it could work, but it's a different kind of like behavior, no? Because it relates more to other things that just rather consumption itself. So in that sense, I don't know, but what is very clear from the results is that repetition mechanism works very good, and it doesn't even have to go through your values or to your to appeal to other things that normally people are seeking with other instruments. Like with norm, you're seeking for norm activation, pro-environmental behaviors, pro-environmental attitudes, and here is more straightforward. It just goes through quality and quality of what you're buying.
Well, we have more questions, but unfortunately we have to end here. So that thank you very much, Juana, for the presentation, and thank everybody for the questions. So now I will introduce Anna Peggins from the German Development Institute, and the floor It's all yours, Anna.
Thank you very much. So we did an experiment in Argentina, in a medium-sized city in Argentina, where we tried to promote household waste separation. And that was a cooperative project between the city that we worked with, the city of Trelew, the University of Heidelberg, the World Bank's behavioral unit, Embed, and us, the German Development Institute. And we were contacted by the municipality because they had a problem with their waste separation. They have a system of separation in place where they ask the households to separate their waste into dry, so that's recyclables, and wet waste, which is all the rest. And then they collect daily, on a daily basis, from Mondays to Saturdays, from the curbside, so it's quite convenient, at least in the middle to high income neighborhoods. And the Thursdays, so one day of the week, is reserved for recyclables collection. And only on that day do they bring the collected waste to the plant in the city and process the materials, and all the rest of the days they bring it directly to the landfill. Now, the situation in the city is that the plant can recover only 2 to 4% of the total waste, and all the rest goes to the landfill, while about 35 to 40% of total waste could be recycled, so would be recyclable material. And so now we see why that might happen. This is the situation on the Thursday in the plant, and you can see that the materials that arrive are mixed with organic materials, they're contaminated, and the workers in the plant have to do their best to fish out the materials that are still usable, but you can imagine that this is not a lot. So the next step after understanding the system was understanding the target behavior. What households need to do is not only separate, but also remember and know the day when they have to put out their separated materials. And that is the Thursday, so they have to remember to only put out the separated materials, the recyclable materials on that day, and not the other materials. And so we try to find out what households actually do and what they know and what they think about waste separation. And we did a baseline survey in November 2018. We found that almost all of the interviews approve of waste separation. 1/3 of them state that they do it, but only 4% state that they separate, that they know what to separate, and they know that they need to put out their separated waste on the Thursday. So it's a combination of knowledge that people have to have, and then of steps of behavior that they need to perform. So in terms of barriers to the target behavior, we hypothesized that there are 3 main barriers. The first one being the knowledge. People simply don't know. 90% of the interviewees don't know that they have to put out the dry waste on the Thursday. The second barrier, even if people know, they have to remember to put it out on the Thursday. And 35% agree or fully agree that having to remember that day keeps them from separating. And then the third barrier, separating is always a hassle. And so people need motivation to do it. And we thought that the strongest levers to provide that motivation might be environmental levers, so the environmental argument, or also you've seen the photo of the workers in the plant, to want to help those workers by pre-separating the waste. So our questions were, can we overcome those 3 barriers? So can we overcome the barrier of the knowledge, of the self-regulation, and also the motivation of having to overcome the hassle? And our research method was a randomized control trial. We had 4 treatment groups plus a control group. I will go into some more detail in a second. We treated about 4,800 households and then subsampled from those treated households for our data collection. We treated by clusters, so we formed clusters, 400 street blocks, and each street block would receive the same treatment. This is our experimental design. It's a 2x2+1 design. Since we assumed that the knowledge of the day, the information about the Thursday of being the day of recyclables collection would be the main barrier, we provided that information to all of the treatment groups. So all of the treatment groups received that information, plus a list that gave people the information which were the materials that needed to be separated. In a second group, we added the motivational aspect, and I'll go through the treatments in a bit more detail in a second. And in the third and fourth group, we added a reminder that it would be the Thursday where they had to put up their waste. And then, of course, the fifth group was the control group, which received no treatment at all. So this is how our treatment looked. This is the treatment for the knowledge barrier alone. So highlighted, you can see the slogan, "Saca solo los secos los jueves," which means put out only the dry waste on the Thursday. And then we had a simplified depiction of the target behavior, where people could see the two different steps of their target behavior and the impact that those steps would have. And on the back of the letter, we would have a list of what is considered dry waste and what is considered wet waste. In the second group, we added the motivational aspect to the pure information, explaining the work in the recycling plant. So we chose the kind of warm glow, the wanting to help, the compassion element for that treatment. We had photos and citations of the workers, and so that was added to the purely informational aspect. Then in the third group, the self-regulation barrier, we designed together with the municipality magnetic calendar. So the upper part is magnetic, and it repeats the slogan that people also received in the letter. So people in that group would receive the information letter, the first one that I showed you, plus this calendar. And the lower part is the calendar part with the Thursdays marked in green. And the fourth group received the information, the motivation, and the calendar. So all the interventions that we designed. For data collection, we did 2 waves of data collection in March and in September. So in March last year, that was 2 weeks after the intervention. In September, that was about half a year after the intervention. And we randomly sampled about 900 households from the street blocks that we had treated, and of course the control. And additionally, in March, we did a survey where we randomly sampled about 3,000 households in the street blocks. Our preliminary analysis suggested that the information that people gave on their separation behavior differed from what we found in what we could observe from the collection of waste. And so we did not repeat that survey since we found the results to be unreliable. Maybe I will skip that right to the results. So what we found was that in the control group, surprisingly high share of households seem to perform the target behavior. The blue bars are the 2 weeks results, and the orange bars are the long-term, the 6 months results. So around 20% of households do perform the target behavior. But we could increase that behavior to around 30%. And in the short and the long term, all treatments were significant. All treatment effects were significant compared to control. We did not find significance in the differences between the treatment groups. So we shouldn't really speculate too much about why some groups might have lower impacts than others. Those differences were not significant. So what we can not say is that, for example, sorry, let me skip back. Adding the motivational aspect decreased the target behavior, but neither can we say that it increased the target behavior. And similarly for the calendar, even in the long term, we would have assumed that people put that calendar on their fridge, because that's quite a thing in Argentina, people do that, and that it keeps reminding them of the target behavior throughout the year. But we don't see a stronger effect in the long term in the calendar groups either. We communicated our results to the municipality and they were quite convinced, and so decided to distribute the informative letters which were effective and also the cheapest intervention. So they decided to distribute these letters to all middle and high income households in November 2019. And we accompanied that with the data collection before, during and after the upscaling. We have not finished the analysis yet. We can see some trends, but I want to be careful in interpreting because we do not have the analysis of significance yet. So to conclude, we can say that the program was effective. We had a significant increase of the share of households participating in the correct way in the recycling system at relatively low costs, so about 10 eurocent per letter, plus the distribution costs. All treatment were significant in compared to control, and also the effects are quite sustainable. So after half a year, we still measure significant effects. Neither the motivational elements nor the calendars had additional effects. We would have expected that, but didn't find it. What we also see is that 70% of the households still do not perform the target behavior. Having said that, we applied quite a strict definition of the target behavior. So only those households who put out exclusively dry waste were counted as performing the target behavior. There were more households that separate, put out their dry waste, but add the wet waste. The next steps, well, we will finalize the remaining analysis of the data. We did collect data on empty baskets, so that still needs to be included in the analysis. We still have to perform the analysis on the endline survey and on the upscaling. And then looking forward, we're planning to do similar experiments with supermarket customers in Peru, and possibly also something similar in other countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was a great presentation and a great example of how research and policy can be combined. So personally, congratulate you for this. It should be the way. So let's go to some questions. First of all, regarding your result, we saw there some absence of synergetic effects, of combination effects between treatments. And Steve would like to ask why, and in particular, why the motivation treatment didn't have any significant effect. Do you think that simply by information we reach the level of how much we can affect behavior, or that there were some background psychological effects going on when you provide the motivation letter, maybe even crowding out for some reason?
Yes, I don't want to speculate too much because, as I mentioned, the differences between the groups are not significant. So we cannot say that adding these aspects reduced the effect, but also it didn't increase them. That can have several reasons. We would have to do some more, probably also qualitative research for really getting behind those reasons. But as you already said, the letter was quite full of information, so maybe we did overload people. It might be an in-group, out-group phenomenon where people simply do not identify so much with the workers in the plant. We might not have struck the right tone. People might have felt pressed or urged to act, and that might have compensated for some of the positive effects. So I don't really, I cannot offer any well-based information on that because we haven't followed up in a more in-depth way. But going forward, we would probably test a different motivational aspect, such as environmental concern or something like that.
Thank you. And Andres is asking a more general question. After so many years, so recycling has been like the flag of being pro-environmentalist in somehow. So why do you think that it's still missing in our mindset? Why do we still need the reminders to
I think that, I mean, this research has been done in a middle-income context. I think that in many countries we already have quite a high awareness of environmental issues and willingness to also address those issues. In other countries, people have different worries. I mean, we did that experiment in the middle of an economic crisis, which has worsened now. We shouldn't forget that people sometimes struggle from their day-to-day lives, and that recycling is then something that might not be on top of their agenda. We have to accept that. So I think it is important to make it as easy and attractive and low cost as we can, just to make it easy for people to participate in the system, even if it is not on top of their agenda.
Great, thank you. And before going to Ivan's questions regarding some socio-demographics, I would like to stress a bit like this point a bit further. So I like the point that it's a not so like developed country. It's developed Argentina, but like the priority there, it's not the environmental behavior always. Do you think that this has like more? I don't know, like, do you have like a more general comment that we here making like so many studies, mostly in the Western world, in the States, in Europe, in Australia, we are missing like the big picture because there are so many studies about like intrinsic motivation, but maybe this is like a meta value, right? Meta materialistic value, while the rest of the world, which is the majority of the world, do not have these concerns. Do you think that like we are overselling the pro-environmental motivations?
Whether we're overselling?
Yeah, like a researcher. So if somebody like reads the literature, he will or she will like take the impression that pro-environmental values and the intrinsic motivation is so important. But most of these studies are being done in the Western universities or in the Western like world in general. Do you think that maybe as scientists we're missing this point of that not everywhere environmental values might be so high up in the agenda?
I think that we tend to be in our bubble and that this can be problematic because we that impedes us from reaching out to other people. Having said that, environmental awareness does not necessarily lead to environmental actions. So something that our research partners also tell us is, well, do your homework in your own countries when it comes to environmental footprints before coming to us and asking us to act in an environmentally friendly way. And that is something that that is very understandable, I must say. So I think it is very, very important, especially if we do behavioral research, to put ourselves in their shoes and to see what their concerns really are, and how we can, as I said, make it easy, make it attractive for everybody to act in an environmentally friendly way.
Thank you. So the question by Ivan, I will quote it because probably I will misunderstand it, but he says, maybe I missed it, but do you have in the survey the characteristics of people like income, climate concern, etc.? Maybe it is worth redoing in a regression framework controlling for those features.
So we do have some of that data in the baseline survey, but the baseline survey had a rather small N. And since we have 5 groups, we cannot really do that kind of regression because simply the numbers will become too small. So that is something that that I would probably change in the next project to have a bit larger N to be able to do those things ex post then, yeah. It's also quite difficult to attribute the individual interviews to the ways that we collected because of data protection issues also.
Okay, thank you. And Maria Jose asked whether you think that part of these results are caused by the lack of public investment in terms of environmental education.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Part of the problem that people did not know that it was Thursday was that initially the municipality, I think in 2013, had communicated the Tuesday as the day of recyclables collection, and that still had stuck in people's minds, and then they had changed the day, but they hadn't told people. So it is small wonder that it's not just or it's not even about raising the willingness or increasing environmental concern, but simply about telling people what they need to do to participate in the system. So it's pure and simple information. And something that I've also found, this is more of a personal impression rather than something that I could base on anything large N, is that even in very poor contexts, people are environmentally aware and are willing to contribute to environmental protection. So we should also not underestimate people's willingness to do their share.
Great. Nice way to wrap up, to close. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you.
Thanks. And now we will be going to the last presentation of the session. It is Sasha Kun by the German Development Institute. Sasha,
thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm gonna present a paper called AC/DC Ain't No Fan, inspired by the band, in collaboration together with John Torgerson from the University of Aarhus and Florian Kutzner from the University of Heidelberg. The amount of cooling degree days is the number of degrees that a day's temperature is above 18 degrees, is increasing around the world. So people are not wanting to stay in an unheated building, but instead begin to consider cooling the building. And according to the International Energy Agency, the cooling degree days are increasing tremendously. And of the 2.8 million people who live in these hottest regions, so far only 8% currently possess ACs, which means that with increasing incomes and increasing temperatures around the world, the air conditioner stock is expected to increase dramatically. And while the chilling relief brings improved living standards, it threatens attempts to mitigate climate change at the same time. And the cooling sector is probably responsible for about 40% of energy use in urban areas. And by 2050, EAA predicts that 50% of global energy consumption will be from cooling. Looking at the literature, an array of energy efficiency policies try to target appliance standards such as banning of climate agents in the cooling chain, or increasing minimal efficiency standard. By now, compulsory energy efficiency labels are widespread. They try to reduce the information asymmetries. By now, over 463 labels in 199 countries exist. And depending on the context and target group, they are more or less effective, but their effectiveness can be increased. And so far, research has mainly focused on richer countries, and one can expect cultural differences on the perception of labels that affect environmental consumer choice. According to the literature, people use consumer goods to signal status. Consumers also adjust their energy consumption to others. We've seen a presentation on this topic before in this session. And the functional theory of attitudes suggests that consumers value products for a variety of reasons, and these reasons can be used to motivate sustainable consumer choice. So there's a collection of reasons, such as people want to fit in with their peers, people want to learn something new about a technological device that is green, they want to acquire comfort with a new green air conditioner, or they want to save money on the electricity bill with an energy efficient device. Or they're utilitarian, they have strong values and they want to express these values to protect the environment. Or there are reasons that people just want to feel good about themselves for doing something for the environment. Or another social aspect, they want to impress others. The lead questions of our research are, how much are consumers influenced by an energy label that contains the attributes of a brand, the energy efficiency rating, the cooling technology, and the price. The cooling technology being included as an exploratory research because we were collaborating with the German development institution, the GIZ. And then also we look at whether functional marketing messages can be used to increase the impact of labels. We conducted a household survey in Ghana, Philippines, and Peru. However, only in Ghana and Philippines, the cooling degrees are as high that cooling is a matter for a majority of people. And according to the World Value Survey, people in the Philippines seem to especially value environmental reasons a bit more than in Ghana. On the other hand, however, Ghanaians seem to value social reasons more than in the Philippines. So Ghanaians like to care for their community, whereas Philippines are more likely, for example, to donate to an environmental group according to the World Value Survey. So our hypotheses are that in general, energy efficient air conditioners will be preferred. Reasons related to environmental values will increase the impact of energy efficiency on choice in the Philippines, whereas in Ghana, social aspects such as impressing others or fitting in with your peers can be used to motivate consumer choice for energy efficiency products. But we also study in exploratory fashion other attitude functions to motivate energy efficiency consumer choice. So these are the two labels. The left one is the Ghanaian label, the right one is the Philippine label that we used for the study. We created about 200 stimuli for each country. We based these stimuli on real market assessment that we did in each country. So these are real air conditioners that are available in the market that we base the price and the other attributes rating on. This is the design of the choice task that people were presented with. They always had the option to choose between two devices. They were asked to do 12 sequential choices of these type of dichotomous choice sets. Before the task, people got a short introduction to the task where they learned that there were several brands that would vary on these devices, that every air conditioner came with different attribute ratings. We also explained the different refrigerants that would vary, that we included as an exploratory fashion. So there are currently 3 different cooling gases in the market in these devices. These cooling gases are needed in air conditioners, but also refrigerators to exchange the temperature within the outside and the inside of a room. The R22 is currently a very pollutant gas, greenhouse gas. The R410A is slightly better, and the R29 is at the moment the most green gas. It's a natural gas and therefore doesn't have ozone polluting or a greenhouse gas effect. And we also varied the price on a continuous scale. And then between participants, we varied the framed messages referring to the different attribute functions. And we also included a control group that you see at the bottom. Coming to the results, what you see here are the results for the Philippines, only looking at the attributes. On the y-axis, you see the utility of each attribute, and what you can see that the variance of the rating is especially large, which means that rating had the largest effect on choices, confirming for the Philippines our first hypothesis. If you now want to know the absolute preference of a stimuli, I just highlighted the comparison of 2 air conditioners here, the yellow and the green one, and the circles refer to the equivalent utility of the attributes. So the yellow one has a slightly lower price, therefore has a slightly higher utility for price, but on the other 2 attributes, the green air conditioner has a higher utility and therefore would be preferred. Now looking also at the attributes for Ghana, we see a similar pattern. Rating has a tremendous effect on choice, and we find that also refrigerant influences choices. So air conditioners with the better, greener refrigerant is preferred in Ghana. And now if we look at within manipulation of the different framings, what we do find in the Philippines is an interaction effect of the environmental framing on the energy efficiency. So the gray line refers to the utility of the energy efficiency rating that is increased, especially for the environmental framing in the Philippines, whereas in Ghana, the comfort, the fit-in, and the impress framing increase the utility of the energy efficiency. For exploratory reasons, we also included in the analysis the interaction between the framings and the cooling technology and the price. And there we find for Philippines also the same effect for the cooling refrigerant for the environmental framing condition. However, the learning and money incentive framing seems to decrease the preference for better cooling technologies. So, in conclusions, consumers focus on the environmentally relevant attributes on a label when their meaning is explained to them. Consumers prefer air conditioners with higher star rating and better cooling technology. Price, however, seems to have less importance than we expected initially. This might be due to the fact that a discrete choice experiment is usually not incentivized, and therefore this might create this artificial environment where people always go for the better device due to the reason that we also explained it, the task to them before. But still, these discrete choice experiments are a valid tool to study choice experiments. But for further research, we also would think that studies looking at the preference at the sales points where air conditioners are actually sold would be interesting. But what we really found as a new evidence is that highlighting certain benefits instead of just economic savings via short messages that refer to attitude functions can motivate consumers to prefer energy efficient devices. But the impact really depends on the country focus, on the country context. So in the Philippines, we find that framings referring to environmental protection were really successful, whereas in Ghana, we confirm our hypothesis that social aspects play a crucial role to motivate consumer choice. That was it. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Sasa. That was very nice. Let me start with some questions. The first one is by Carla. She's asked whether you know the percentages of the people that they have access to air conditioning in this in the study that you do.
Yes,
right?
Yes, actually, I do, and I actually have an additional slide where we actually asked that. So in Ghana, 83% of participants are aware of the label and know the label, and 50% of people own an appliance with that label. And then we also asked, that's the gray bars, whether people understand the information on the label. And there we find that only 30% of the participants that know the label actually also fully understand the information on the label, and only 25% state that they do understand it to some degree. So in follow-up qualitative question, we found out that most people do understand the energy efficiency star rating that is mainly highlighted in the label, but not so much the other information that is presented on the label. In the Philippines, there are currently two labels that exist, an older one and the newer one. And we tested the newer one, And there you can clearly see that so far only 18% of participants know the label, and of these only 36% own the label. So it's a small amount of people in the sample that actually know this new label in the Philippines, but still a lot of people know the old label. And since we expected that not many people would know the label in the Philippines, we also thoroughly explained the label to participants so that they would understand the label. So we can assume that in our sample, most people understand the label fairly well. But to come back to the questions, not that many people actually own devices with the label.
Great, thank you. So a comment by Carla and then a related question by Maria Jose. So Carla is just mentioning that this is like a very big issue regarding social justice, because people in the global south many times lack the infrastructure, lack the ability to have, in case like an air condition. And given this, and given the current energy crisis, and that we're getting the peak of oil and other fossil fuels, how would you, so the question by Maria Jose is, do you think that exploring this necessity is desirable? In the global south, this is oftentimes not considered anything but a luxury.
Yes, this is true. It is, especially in the country studied is still a luxury, but the middle class is growing. So people are acquiring more income and wealth, and therefore are able to buy more of these goods, and especially air conditioners give a lot of possibilities to households. People are able to work longer hours. They tend to be more healthy, and therefore it is expected that the sales are going to increase. And therefore, I think it's crucial to have this type of research and work that kind of helps countries to avoid getting or investing into technologies with old energy efficient devices and cooling technologies, so that they can leapfrog to the most efficient devices. There's actually an estimation by the International Energy Agency that by transferring the markets in developing countries into more energy efficient markets, 83% of energy growth could be saved. But nevertheless, it's a topic of privilege, and therefore we're also working closely with the GSZ, the German Institute for Development Cooperation, and they are setting up a project where they are investing in a refund scheme where they financially support households to get energy efficient devices. And they also try to make these devices more affordable by closely working together with importers and producers in being able to bring energy efficient devices into the market that are not too pricey.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it seems that this issue creates some the interest in our chat. On the one hand, like Anna responds saying that this question is very interesting, given that air conditioning will become more and more of a necessity. But of course, we understand the comment that maybe this is a bit strange, that like we study this when we consume more. But anyways, Elena asked whether households in Ghana have regular electricity.
By now, yes, they do, but a few years, I think until 2005, load shedding was still a current practice in Ghana. You sometimes still have electricity outages, but they are usually just to an overload of the net, but they're becoming really rare and usually only last for up to 5 to 10 minutes. So I think looking at the statistics, about 85% of also in rural areas, people are connected to the grid.
Great. And can you share a couple of words regarding your cultural differences? Because in Philippines, I think it was, no, in Ghana, it was where it works better, the moral suasion. In Philippines,
The social aspects work better in Ghana. Yeah.
do you have any insights of why is this?
Well, previous research found similar patterns. So if you look at the World Value Survey, for example, that's where we based our hypothesis on, is that in Ghana, the community seems to be really important, whereas in the Philippines, environmental aspects are more relevant. This might be to the fact that in the Philippines, environmental issues are more on the topic of media coverage. They're also slightly more affected by floods or hurricanes, and therefore people are more conscious about the environment. Whereas in Ghana, really the community is a crucial aspect also for social security and other aspects in life.
Great. And there is some discussion going on regarding the alternatives to air conditioning. Somebody mentioned the fair conditioning, which I'm not sure what is this, but Christian is asking whether you have any information of more traditional alternatives to air conditioning, like architectural measures.
Yes, actually, I got to know an architect in Ghana that is building houses that make use of the sea breeze by a certain architectural construction of the houses. He was, however, saying that it's still quite difficult to get people to be interested in this type of style, because unfortunately, a lot of people are still following the American way of architectural structure, that you have these concrete blocks and that you have a huge parking lot where you can show other people that you have a status symbolic car, for example, and closed windows and so forth. So it's unfortunately maybe the wrong norm that is being kind of followed by middle-income countries instead of relying on traditional forms of architecture. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for the question. That was very interesting. The presentation and the topic is like a lot of attention. And I think that would conclude our session for today. You can continue the presentation in the Discord channels for any of the 3 presentations. And now just to remind you that we'll have like 45 minutes of break, and we will continue at 12 o'clock.
Thank you as well. Looking forward to the discussion in the channels.
Thank you very much, everybody. See you in a while. Bye-bye.
Bye.